What's up, small fry snacks? I'm Quackers Co, and this is a fish fry from Marooner's Bay. For our cooking utensils, we have the Splash-O-Matic, the Dark Tetradoolies, the Splatana Wiper, and the E-Liter 4K. At Marooner's Bay, we have to keep ourselves really tight on what our gameplay is. We always got to make sure that we're luring bosses as much as possible and dealing with shoreline targets as quick as possible. The elevators here at Marooner's Bay are also really good tools for getting just a little bit of extra distance out there onto the shoreline to reach some of those shoreline targets. They can also be used to deliver scrappers to the basket just that much quicker, and you have to be careful about stunning that scrapper as you're lifting the elevator. But with these weapons, it should be pretty easy to precisely activate that elevator so that you can deliver them. Except for the E-Liter, our range on this composition is just a little bit short, so if you want to take out a stinger, make sure that you're either using the Wiper's vertical shots or the range of the Dark Tetradoolies. The Splash-O-Matic can take it out pretty quickly, but its damage is just low enough that you may find yourself surrounded there by the shoreline. The E-Liter can also use quarter charge shots in order to take out one pot at a time, using its range to get yourself some extra safety. The E-Liter also has a piercing shot, so if you're aiming towards the base of the stinger, you can also splat some enemies while you're dealing with that enemy. Marooner's Bay also has some pretty smart spots where you can throw bombs at for fly fish. We usually do not need to get down to the shoreline to throw these bombs, so be careful about where you're putting yourself and where the enemies are being lured to. It's best for us to stay up on the boat, closer to the front of the boat, that way bosses can be lured and we can be aware on what is spawning around here. If a big shot shows up, that Wiper and the E-Liter 4K can make quick work of him. Just make sure you're making contact with that Wiper whenever you get down there. It'll be able to splat that big shot quicker, and that large blast that it creates can take out some enemies while you're dealing with them. This map is just so tight that if we're not constantly dealing with lessers, we'll easily get overrun in the last half of the match. So in that first half, try to lure as many targets as possible as close to the basket. Then in the second half of the match, you have to deal with steel ills, Salmon lids, and steelheads before they become too much of a nuisance. Both the steel ill and the Salmon lid will block your shots, making it harder to deal with lessers, as well as the Salmon lid just constantly pouring out lessers onto you. So try to jump over that center pit, activate those Salmon lids, and climb on top of them. Also, when you're on top of that Salmon lid, start taking out enemies as much as possible. You can easily get some advantages on some fish sticks or steelheads in case you have one of the shorter range weapons. And if you get the Splatana Wiper up there, start jumping down at that steelhead when he activates his bomb and make contact with your slice, giving you a one-shot splat. One smart thing to do though is to just keep that E-Liter 4K just a little bit further back. It has some incredible range, and that full charge shot can take almost anything out, especially if you're dealing with Salmon lids or steelheads. Try to keep that aim tight and keep charging this thing up, that way you can deal that piercing damage to lessers and take out those bosses, that way we don't have to get too much tunnel vision on them. The Dark Tetradoolies and the Splatana Wiper will be able to take out fish sticks from the ground level, but I promise you, climbing up on them will give you that much more advantage on some of these other enemies that are sitting further back on the boat. Just try to be careful about dawdling and not doing anything. Since there's such a small amount of turf, always make sure that this turf is painted and that you're dealing some kind of damage. If something's coming its way, but it's too far away, toss a bomb, that way it's damaged before it gets too close. For our occurrences here at Marooner's Bay, between a normal tide and a high tide, we lose all of our shoreline, making it so that all of the enemies will come from the end of the boat. But what this means for our occurrences is on a grillers and glowflies wave, we have to get good enough to not need that lower shoreline, which means funneling all those rush wave enemies to that right side Great Bridge, that way you can funnel them in and cause that supreme damage as a team. That way, if anyone needs to get away so that they can put an egg in, it's not so difficult. And the same can be said for a griller's wave. As long as we're getting that griller as close to the basket as possible before we stun and splat it, that'll make it easier to get our eggs in and focus on taking out the small fry. What makes these waves so difficult are the lessers instead of the bosses. So try to make sure that you're using those physics to your advantage. Move the enemies in smart ways, that way when things get crazy, it's not an immediate crew wipe. As long as you can focus on finishing these waves without using that lower shoreline, you'll find it that much easier to clear them on any tide. A high tide normal wave at Marooner's Bay does eliminate that shoreline, making it so that all the enemies come from the back of the boat. At this moment, you'll have to use as many advantages to get to the back of the boat, that way you can take out the priority targets. Getting on top of Salmon lids and fish sticks is a great way of getting to that back of the boat without getting surrounded by enemies. And if the boss RNG is just so bad, then you have to rely on the snatchers to grab the eggs and bring them back to you. Be careful about splatting snatchers that are making their way to the back of the boat, as they may be your only tools to get you to quota. For a low tide at Marooner's Bay, we do have a little bit extra space to move around here, but we still don't have any walls until fish sticks show up. So you have to make sure that you're dealing damage and eliminating lessers as quick as possible. It still helps to lure maws, flipper flopper, and scrappers to the basket, but you gotta make sure that you're clearing those lanes, that way you can make it to a shoreline target whenever it shows up. The E-Leader 4K is a fantastic weapon for this. Charge it all the way up and eliminate as many enemies as possible with every shot. It'll make it that much easier to stay alive, and to get some pretty high egg numbers. Marooner's Bay is an incredible map for overfishing, but if you're not constantly eliminating enemies, you will get overrun, and you may find it hard to put those eggs in the last half of the match. Luckily, during a Quahog charge, things can go a little bit more easy since we have the turrets to reach those shoreline targets. And we have 3 weapons with some pretty good mobility, so as long as that E-Leader 4K and another player are always in the turrets, you'll find it easier to keep those Quahogs at bay and run those eggs in. Just try to be careful about being in that turret without causing that much damage. You could always be splatting some kind of enemies that are making their way in. For a mothership occurrence, we do have some pretty good mid-range weapons with the Tetradulies and the Wiper, and some long-range damage with that E-Leader 4K, but the E-Leader 4K's range is based on how far you charge it. So for the E-Leader 4K, if you're aiming at a Chinook coming in, as soon as you see that X on your reticle, you know that you can hit that target, release that charge, and splat that enemy. Try to be careful about charging all the way up when you don't need it. The E-Leader 4K can eat through ink very quickly, making it so that you get surrounded really easily, and once that mothership starts to come in, you'll find it harder to cause damage to it. And the E-Leader 4K can do some incredible damage while that mothership is on approach. So keep a steady flow of taking out those Chinooks, looking for coolers that are still releasing enemies, and causing some kind of damage to that mothership when it's on approach. For a low tide mothership, there will be more Chinooks that land behind the basket, so since we have some pretty decent range on all of our weapons, keep spread out, and keep splatting those enemies and running eggs. As long as everybody is splatting enemies and running eggs, mothership waves usually go pretty well, and you can usually get some pretty good egg numbers. On a Goldie Seek at Marooner's Bay, we do have a pretty good strategy that we can use to find that Goldie. As long as we focus on the 2 gushers that are on the shoreline at the front of the boat, that'll give you the information to know whether or not it's on the top of the boat. And if any of those gushers are short, then you know it's going to be at the back of the boat. Just try to make sure that you're not waiting for other people to open gushers. Any one of the 4 players can be the one to find it, and it does feel good to be the one to find it. Be careful if you find the Goldie at the back of the boat, as at this location, it's easy to pop out all those eggs way too far away from the basket. Try to pop those eggs out in smart locations, and just know whenever that Goldie goes back into the valve, it is replenishing its HP, so the next time you find him, you will have the option for getting more eggs. The E-Leader 4K does have that piercing charge shot, so you can fire through your teammates and other enemies in order to start knocking some eggs out, but if you can keep that Splatana Wiper right in front of the Goldie trying to keep pace with him, or right behind him trying to keep pace with him, every single charge swipe will knock 1 egg out of him. This is a pretty good composition for a Goldie Seek, so try to get those high egg numbers. On a Mudmouth occurrence, the Splatana Wiper and the E-Leader 4K can do some fantastic lesser control, and the ink efficiency of the Sploosh and the Dark Tetradulies makes it easy to throw those eggs. So try to understand what your weapon roll is on some of these waves. It'd be much easier if the E-Leader 4Ks focus on lesser control, using that piercing damage shot, and then whenever the smaller lessers show up, that Wiper can take care of them no problem. And if you're on a wave 3 and the golden Mudmouths start showing up, start activating those specials, try to get those egg numbers as high as possible. For a giant tornado occurrence, we can kind of go with the same rules that we have for a Mudmouth wave. That piercing shot of the E-Leader 4K and that close range slash that the Wiper has can do some incredible lesser control. Just try to position yourself at the beginning or the end of the egg chain, that way the enemies aren't dropping directly on your head. Marooner's Bay requires some tight gameplay, but once you get a good match going, it feels great to not just clear it, but to also get some pretty high egg numbers. This map is really good for overfishing, just as long as you're running it right. Okay, let's get into the cookware. Our first cooking utensil is the Splash-O-Matic. The Splash-O-Matic has an incredibly fast fire rate, but its range and its damage is just a little bit lacking. So we gotta be careful about playing too aggressively or getting right there by the shoreline. The odds are you just don't have the damage output to deal with all the enemies that are spawning near you. So it'd probably be best to stay as close to the basket as possible. Your coverage is extremely useful for whenever a flipper flopper shows up. But if lureable targets aren't showing up, then you will have to get the splash out there and start to use its damage output. Look for those opportunities where you can climb a fish stick in order to get a little bit of extra range out of it. I give the Splash-O-Matic a wall paint score of 8 out of 10 here at Marooner's Bay. Its range and its coverage does an incredible job at painting this map. I just wish it had a little bit more range, that way we don't have to get all the way to the shoreline in order to paint some of these walls. Our second cooking utensil are the Dark Tetradulies. The Dark Tetradulies do have that special ability to do 4 dodge rolls. but you need to be careful about using this for reasons of dodging boss fire. One of the best things you can do with the Dark Tetras is to space out those dodge rolls, that way you can keep using its turret mode in between each dodge roll. You don't have to deactivate turret mode in order to get your dodge rolls back, so as long as you wait enough time in between each dodge roll, you can keep dodging around this map using its turret mode for that higher and more precise DPS. That turret mode is also one of the best abilities for taking out fish sticks or stingers. It gives you just that much more of a precise shot, making it easier to take out the multiple targets of these enemies. The Dark Tetras will also have the same problem with the Splash-O-Matic. Their damage output is just low enough that you don't want to play too aggressively, getting in the face of things. Keep your distance, and use those dodge rolls in case something gets too close. That way you can activate that turret mode and shred it up. I give the Dark Tetra Dualies a wall paint score of 8 out of 10 here at Marooner's Bay. It may not have that same fire rate that the Splash-O-Matic has, but its range does allow you to paint more of these walls without having to get down to the shoreline, especially if you want to paint some of those elevator walls at the beginning of the wave. Our third cooking utensil is the Splatana Wiper. The Splatana Wiper has some pretty good damage with its normal horizontal swipes, as well as its vertical charge slice. But it's only whenever you're making contact with that wiper directly to the enemy will you get the extra damage output that this weapon has. And if you're using those charge slices, try to make sure that you're jumping anytime that you're making an approach towards an enemy. That dash forward that you use does take time before your attack commences, and that extra time adds up. The wiper will probably be the easiest weapon to play aggressively, considering that you'll be able to get 2 charge slices in on a Quahog before it can swipe you. But with that being said, you gotta make sure that the Splatana Wiper isn't just focused on dealing with lessers. 2 charge slices can take out a steelhead, and those vertical shots being fantastic on taking multiple stinger buckets out at one time. So you have to be versatile with the Splatana Wiper. It can do some incredible support, as well as being one of the best egg runners. It'll be best to put yourself all around this map, but be careful about luring targets away from the basket. I give the Splatana Wiper an 8 out of 10 here at Marooner's Bay. Its horizontal slices can get the walls painted on the boat super duper quick, as well as the charged vertical slashes being able to reach the elevators from the boat. But unless you're constantly keeping up with the technique of this weapon, you're going to find yourself accidentally activating that charge dash and flying right off of the boat. So keep your movement nice and tight with the weapon, you'll find that it's one of the most fun weapons to use. Our last cooking utensil is the E-Liter 4K. The E-Liter 4K has the highest damage on a fully charged shot out of all of the chargers. But with that charge up time that it needs, you have to be very careful about where you're positioning yourself here at Marooner's Bay. If no one's dealing with those shoreline priority targets, you're going to find it really hard to charge it up if you're the one chilling towards the back of the boat. So try to look for those situations where you can move this weapon just that much more forward and be able to utilize just that much more of its damage. Fish sticks are some of the best locations for the E-Liter 4K on Marooner's Bay. With that range that you have, you'll be able to reach just about any target and cause some massive damage to it. A fully charged shot from the E-Liter also splats Quahogs, so try to line up as many enemies as possible that are funneling up that boat and eliminate them in one fell swoop. Another smart thing you can do is to activate the elevators, giving you that much extra distance out there onto the shoreline, making it that much easier to take out enemies like stingers and big shots. Try to be careful about not doing anything with the E-Liter 4K. Charge it up and try to eliminate as many enemies as possible with every single shot. I give the E-Liter 4K a wall paint score of 3 out of 10 here at Marooner's Bay. It puts the classic charger strip of paint on the wall whenever you shoot a charge shot at it, which makes wall painting with the chargers kind of a nightmare. But it does have that extra range to help paint some of these elevator walls at a little bit more of a distance. The king to grace us with his presence on this rotation will be the Kohozuna. And the Kohozuna usually needs a good blend of both egg throwing and damage output with your main weapon in order to splat him. For this composition, try to be aware of which of your teammates are pushing towards that Kohozuna. A Splatana Wiper player should keep it nice and close to the Kohozuna to cause that charged splash damage, but it also will cause you to easily get splat by him. The E-Liter 4K and the Dark Tetra Dualies can cause some really good damage at a distance, and that Splash-O-Matic can do some pretty good constant DPS as long as you get it close enough. But try to be careful about getting too much tunnel vision on the king. You'll need those golden eggs if you want to take him down with some extra time left. Just try to be really smart about how you're using your specials. They're fantastic weapons for taking out shoreline targets right at the beginning of extra waves, or to cause some extra damage on that Kohozuna in case you're finding it hard to splat enemies and to cause that extra damage. But as I said, try to keep a nice focus on both causing damage with the eggs and with your main weapon, and we should be able to splat this Kohozuna pretty easily. And the fish fry usually comes out before the stage rotation, so if you want to catch these updates when they're hot and fresh, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. And if you want other fellow Grizco employees to receive these tips, make sure you like and share the video. Bye-bye. To give the fish fry an algorithm boost, just comment what your favorite or least favorite weapon is of this composition. I'm going to have to give my favorite to the Splatana Wiper. Once you get the Splatana Wiper down, it makes for some pretty high energy, high technique waves, and it's just a blast to use. Alrighty guys, bye-bye.